You see, every single one of you in this room have a destiny. Every single one of you in this room have a purpose, but your purpose has a process. And that process is full of tests and trials and seasons that don't make sense, pieces that feel weird at times, and you're going, how is this going to play? Abraham went through this. Moses went through this. Joseph went through this. John the Baptist went through this. Paul the Apostle. Peter went through this. David, he was anointed before he was appointed. He was told one day you're going to be the king of Israel, but then 13 years go by. And there's some weird years in there. In fact, there's one moment where David actually checks himself into an asylum. He calls himself an insane man, and he acts crazy for 3 months. He loses his mind. And yet this guy's going to be the future king of Israel, the man after God's own heart. God uses even depressed maniacs to do great things for the kingdom of God. God can use you. God can use your daughter. God can use the part of your testimony you don't want anyone to find out about. God will use the weird parts of what you've walked through in your marriage. He'll use the weird pieces where you go, I don't think this is supposed to be a part of our story. And God says, I can use that. He can use things that he didn't send. He knows how to use the things that life does to you and people do to you that are painful and hurtful. And most people want to skip over the Arabia season. Most people want to skip past the wilderness. But how you handle the wilderness determines whether or not you make it into the promised land. Really, it determines whether or not you stay in the promised land. Because there's a lot of people who get promoted fast. They get into the promised land, but they skipped the process, and so they don't last long in the promotion. What if God is patiently preparing you in this process so that you can last a whole lot longer in your promoted season? He prepares us in the private places, in the quiet places, in the Arabian Nights. He begins to work in us, and he says, Peter, it doesn't make sense to you now, but someday it will all make sense. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 4, this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. The weight of glory is a heavy weight, and you don't get to carry a heavy weight until you learn how to use the light weights. You start in stages. You grow in stages. Weightlifters understand you don't just walk into a weight room and immediately start doing your goal weights. You got to get there through stages. It's a piece of the process. Every single day matters, and how you handle the off season matters. It's all preparing you for a greater glory. Paul said in Romans 8, verse 8-10, I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is being revealed to us. When Ashley and I first got pregnant with baby number 1, I remember going to the doctor with her, and the doctor said, you're in your first trimester. And I said, man, I feel like I'm in my first trimester. And she rolls her eyes. She's like, you're going to start gaining weight. I said, it's already happening. Like, I don't know what to do about it. She said, it's a piece of the process. I was like, okay, what else? And she said, you're gonna start throwing up every now and then, and your feet are going to swell. And I'm like, oh, man. She's like, not you, Ashley. You know, but I was trying to help Ashley carry that baby, so I gained just as much weight with her. That first, I'm still trying to lose baby weight number 1. But here we are, baby number 5. And there's a piece of the process through pregnancy. Pregnant women understand this, that there's painful, uncomfortable moments when you're carrying something in you that's meant to come out. And there's a due date on that pregnancy. There's a due date on your destiny. There's a due date on your dreams and your prayers. Your prayers do have a due date. Your dreams and your gifts and your talents, they have a due date. But you've got to learn how to carry that pregnancy well. Imagine if Ashley and I came to the doctor in her 3rd trimester, and we said, something feels so wrong. And the doctor says, what? Well, look at her belly. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And her ankles are starting to swell. And it's hard for her to do the things that she was doing before. 8 months ago, the doctor would laugh, and the doctor would say, well, that's part of the process. She's getting ready to have that baby. She's getting closer and closer to her due date. And the process that we walk through requires us to embrace the uncomfortable moments that don't make a whole lot of sense. But I want to tell you today, you are pregnant with potential. You are pregnant with a purpose. You are pregnant with a calling on your life. And God has great things in store for you. He says, if you pass this test, if you can choose during this season not to run from pain, but to lean into it. This last week while we were out of town, I was talking to these Christians that I met that were right there by the ocean. And I said, where are y'all from? They said, we're from Egypt. I said, Egypt, that's amazing. They said, we're Coptic Christians. I said, tell me about the Coptic Christian faith. And they said, well, it goes way back. It's very old. And they said, it's a huge honor, but there's a lot of persecution in our country. And they said, our families had to flee Egypt because we were being threatened. Our church was burned to the ground, and the Muslims hate us there in Egypt. And every single day, we have friends and family members that are calling us, asking us to pray for them because there's intense persecution. There's a lot of pain, but we count it a huge honor to follow Jesus. And when I was listening to them talk about the persecution and the pain, I was thinking, I don't know if the American church realizes what persecution fully looks like. And we don't always want to talk about it. We always kind of want to keep things happy and healthy and well and, you know, at the corner of Walgreens and CVS and everything's sweet and peaceful and your Wi-Fi's working, and when it's not, you feel persecuted and you're like, first world problems. I got to wait in the airport for an extra hour, and I got to wait for my Wi-Fi to get fixed, and my phone's not taking enough pictures. I need more iCloud storage, and I'm persecuted. You're not persecuted. The church in Egypt is walking through intense persecution. We have friends in Israel. We have friends across the Middle East that are walking through intense persecution for their faith. And when you go through things that are painful and things that are frustrating and things that don't make sense, it may not be persecution, but it might be a trial. It might be a test. And you might want to run from it. You might want to hide from it. You might want to tune into only positivity. But God says, I'm going to use that trial and that test to purify your faith so that when you come through this trial, when you come on the other side of this painful test you've been walking through, your faith is going to be more genuine than it ever was before. And you're going to be more ready and more humble and more vulnerable and more broken to be used by God than you ever were in your prideful state. God's waking the American church up. And he's saying there's a piece of what you're walking through that's going to make sense down the road, but it may not make sense right now. There's a piece to this puzzle that you're going, this feels weird. 2021 feels weird. I don't know how this fits into the puzzle. And God says, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it, church. I'm going to use it, son. You see, God knows what's in your future, and he knows what it's going to take to keep you there. So he's going to use the things that don't make sense for your good, to strengthen you, to prepare you for it, to birth something inside you that can only come through pain. You can only get there through a place of trouble and pain. And when you walk through those tests and you don't get bitter, instead you get better. You don't become angry at God. Instead, you get closer to God. You don't walk away from the church. You run into the church. You don't walk away from the faith. You cling even tighter to your faith because you understand that through these trials and these tests and these storms and these difficulties and these testimonies that are still being written, that's where your faith is growing the strongest. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says he makes everything beautiful in its time. In other words, he has a set time for things to happen in your life. He puts eternity in the hearts of all men, yet none can fathom what God is doing from beginning to end. I don't always understand what he's doing, but I know he's doing something good. Romans 8 verse 28, Paul, he would later on write these words. He said, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. Everybody say all things. All things. In other words, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the emphasis is not on all things. The emphasis is on those who have been called according to his purpose. I know he's going to work all things for good. And the reason I know is because I've been called. And because I've been called by his purpose, I can trust that everything I walk through is a part of my calling. Everything I go through, every heartache, every heartbreak. I remember in college, there was this girl I liked, and I asked her out multiple times, and she kept saying no. And then she would say, ask me out again. And then she would say no. And I was like, Delilah, get thee behind me. You know, she was playing games with me. And I remember just feeling frustrated and angry and heartbroken. And there was this one time after several months of trying to ask her out, she kept saying no. And finally she just said, we're not going to ever go out. And I felt so heartbroken. I remember running across the street from ORU to the campus of Victory, and this building wasn't finished yet. And I ran into this space where we were constructing this building. It was open. You could see the sky, and there was concrete laid out here, and they were just preparing the first phase of this Victory sanctuary that you sit in today. But I remember that the beginning of that process, here I was heartbroken, I was in college, I didn't understand why I was going through this. And I felt like the Lord was speaking to me in that moment of heartbreak. And God was saying, this is going to work out for your good. You see, we've got to learn to trust God with the closed doors as much as we get excited about the open doors. When it says he's working all things for your good, it means he's working out even the things that didn't work out. The marriages that ended in divorce. The painful things where you go, why didn't he get healed of cancer? Why did she have to go through chemo treatment? Why did I lose my hair? Why did we lose our son? Why did we go through that miscarriage? And you start asking all these questions. I asked the doctor in the office, I said, why did the ocean choose me? And, and sometimes we ask that in life, why did this happen to me? Why do bad things happen to good people? And God says, I didn't send it, but I'm going to use it. God didn't send the cancer, but he's going to use what the enemy meant for harm for your good.